Rain pooled in the cracked pavement of the industrial district, steam rising from gutters as the last remnants of the evening storm drifted away. In the distance, an old freight train creaked across the rails, its rhythmic clatter echoing through the hollow streets of Eastmoor, a city forgotten by time and prosperity. Beneath a rusted overpass, the makeshift home of metal siding and salvaged tarpaulin glowed with the soft flicker of a kerosene lantern. Inside that little patchwork workshop lived Raven, a 27-year-old mechanical prodigy with a mind sharp enough to rebuild a transmission blindfolded, and hands that bore the stories of years spent fixing things the world gave up on. Her workbench was cluttered with gears, bolts, and bits of old tech scavenged from junkyards. Outside, the sky had just begun to clear, casting a dusky amber light through the gaps in the bridge overhead. Raven sat hunched over a half-dismantled drone toy she was repairing for a neighborhood kid, soldering iron in hand, goggles pulled tight over her stormy gray eyes. She didn't hear the sound at first, a soft clatter, then a scrape, then the unmistakable whimper of someone in distress. She froze, placing the iron down with practiced care. Her boots thudded against the wet concrete as she rose and stepped outside. Not far from her doorway, a small figure sat crumpled beside a toppled mobility device, a rudimentary wheelchair, the left wheel bent and twitching like a broken limb. The boy, no older than 6, stared at her with wide, glassy eyes, his hair soaked and face streaked with grime. "Hey! Are you hurt?" Raven called, her voice cutting clean through the fog. The boy blinked but said nothing. His lip trembled, and his small hands clutched the side of the wheelchair, trying in vain to push himself upright. She knelt down beside him, scanning for injuries. "You out here alone? Where's your grown-up?" Before the child could respond, a voice rang out from the direction of the nearby corner store. "Eli." Raven looked up just as a man sprinted into view. Tall, lean, and sharply dressed in a gray overcoat that had no business in Eastmoor, he skidded to a halt beside them, eyes wide in panic. "Oh, thank God," he breathed, dropping to his knees. "Eli, are you okay?" "I wanted to see the robot sounds," the boy mumbled, not meeting his father's gaze. Raven stood slowly, her expression darkening. He was alone. On the street. His chair's busted, and he could have been hit. I just ran in for a drink," the man stammered, clearly shaken. "It was only for a minute, he must have unlocked the car." She didn't sugarcoat her glare. "You don't leave a disabled kid in a car. Not here. Not anywhere." The man seemed ready to argue, but then looked at the bent wheel and slumped shoulders of his son and said nothing. "I'm sorry," he muttered. "I made a mistake." The boy, Eli, tugged gently at Raven's sleeve. "It's okay. I just wanted to see where the robot noises were coming from." Raven's gaze softened. "You like machines?" Eli nodded earnestly. "I like wheels. Gears. Engines." She gave a small nod, crouching again to examine the wheelchair. "This thing's seen better days," she muttered. "Brakes busted, axles out of alignment. Dangerous." She looked up at the man. "I can fix it. No charge." He blinked. "You don't have to." "I know," she interrupted. "I want to." Eli beamed, and Raven smiled faintly before lifting the chair with one arm and scooping the boy into the other. "Come on. My place is a bit unconventional, but it's got tools and heat." The man followed hesitantly, ducking into the dim-lit shelter beneath the bridge. Inside, the air smelled of metal and oil, but it was warm and full of strange contraptions, hovering fans, spinning widgets, even a pair of mechanical wings suspended from the ceiling. "This your lab?" the man asked, visibly trying to adjust. "Something like that," Raven replied, setting Eli onto a padded chair and grabbing a toolbox. "Name's Raven. You?" "Julian. Julian Wade," he said, removing his coat. He didn't mention who he was or what he did, but Raven clocked the designer watch, polished shoes, and the way he stiffened every time a train rattled above. This was not a man used to grime or grease. Eli, however, was fascinated. "What's that?" he asked, pointing to a peculiar wrench with multicolored tape wrapped around it. "My first tool," Raven said with a grin. "Used it to fix a wind-up clock when I was 8. Haven't let go since." Julian leaned quietly against the wall as Raven worked. Eli chatted happily beside her, asking questions, sharing stories, completely at ease. Raven found herself laughing softly, something she hadn't done in weeks. "You're good with him," Julian finally said, his voice quiet. Raven didn't look up. "He's easy to like. Curious. Brave." Eli rummaged through his coat and handed Raven a folded piece of paper. On it was a crayon drawing, of her, it seemed, with mechanical arms and glowing goggles, standing among stars and gears. "Dad says I can be anything," Eli said proudly. "But I want to be like you." For a moment, Raven couldn't speak. The walls of her world, once built of steel and solitude, shifted, just a little. Julian approached, uncertain. "Look, this may sound strange, but Eli's aide quit last month. It's been hard, juggling everything. He needs someone who sees him." Raven frowned. "I'm not a teacher. Or a babysitter. I'm not asking for that," Julian said. "Just someone real. A few hours a week. Someone who'll talk to him about robots, let him dream a little." Raven looked at Eli, who was carefully reattaching a bolt to a toy car with her spare wrench. She saw herself in him, tenacity wrapped in innocence. "Maybe," she said slowly. "We'll see how it goes." Julian smiled, handing her a clean business card, minimal, elegant, embossed. Julian Wade, founder and CEO, Skynova Technologies. She arched an eyebrow. "Explains the code." He chuckled. "I try not to bring the title up. People get weird." "Well, now I know. I'm weird too," Raven said, sliding the card into her pocket. Outside, the night began to fall, painting the city in silver and shadow. Inside the bridge, under the soft hum of hanging lights and the gentle whirl of gears, something began to take root, a connection sparked not by luxury or design, but by broken wheels, open hearts, and the courage to offer help without asking for anything in return. The days that followed were painted with new rhythms Raven had never expected in her routine life beneath the bridge. It began with a knock, 3 quick taps against a sheet of metal acting as her front door. Julian stood there, dressed down this time in jeans and a weathered jacket, his polished demeanor softened into something almost ordinary. Beside him, Eli grinned widely, clutching a small box under his arm. "You said maybe," Julian said. "Figured we'd try and turn that into a yes." Raven hesitated. She'd spent most of her life pushing people away, guarding her little kingdom of wires and steel. Letting anyone in, especially someone from a world like Julian's, felt like putting a crack in a fortress she had spent years fortifying. And yet, the look on Eli's face, expectant and hopeful, tugged at something deeper. "I've got tools," she said. "And some leftover soup. That enough for an afternoon?" Eli cheered, and Julian chuckled. They stepped into the workshop, where the warm glow of light bulbs strung along pipes above their heads gave everything a soft, golden haze. That afternoon turned into 3. Then 5. Then a week. Raven found herself rearranging her days, carving out time between repairs and junkyard runs to accommodate Eli's visits. He was insatiably curious, always asking about how things worked, drawing wild sketches of machines that walked or floated, and begging Raven to let him help solder or saw. "Not until you master the screwdriver," she'd say, handing him a small bolt set. Julian usually stayed nearby, sitting quietly on an old couch Raven had patched up with duct tape and a faded quilt. He rarely spoke during their lessons, but his eyes followed every movement, every shared laugh, every small victory Eli had when a gear clicked into place or a simple toy car came to life. In that odd cocoon beneath the bridge, something was growing. One evening, as the last streaks of orange painted the sky above the freeway, Raven handed Eli a screwdriver with a carved handle. "What's this?" he asked, eyes wide. "My old one. First tool I ever bought myself. It's yours now." Julian looked up sharply. "That's quite a gift." "It's not for him," Raven replied with a half-smile. "It's for the machines he's going to fix one day." Eli beamed, gripping the handle like it was a sort of destiny. After they left that night, Raven stood at her bench staring at a smudged mirror. She barely recognized the softness in her own expression. She wasn't used to feeling anything but motion, fix this, build that, survive. But now, there was something more. Something. Still. The next morning brought a surprise. Not a person this time, but a drone. Sleek, matte black, hovering just above her shop entrance. It lowered carefully and dropped a box with a mechanical hum. Raven blinked, stepping forward and popping the lid open. Inside was a small card. To Raven, "Thanks for the time, the spark, and for reminding us that real ingenuity doesn't come from labs. Julian." Beneath the card was a portable soldering station, the exact model she had once drooled over in a supply catalog. She stared at it for a long time before shutting the box and setting it aside. Gratitude and suspicion warred inside her. She didn't like gifts. Gifts meant debt. Or worse, expectations. Julian showed up later that day, hands stuffed in his coat pockets, a sheepish look on his face. "You're not mad about the drone, are you?" "Little creepy," she said. He scratched the back of his head. It's the only delivery system I trust. Besides, it was meant as a thank you. Not a bribe. Good, she said, eyes narrowing playfully. 'Cause I don't do bribes. They sat together that afternoon while Eli built a cardboard contraption he insisted would be a robot arm that gives high fives. You two are like magic together, Julian said after a long silence. Raven raised an eyebrow. Magic? I'm a woman with a wrench and too much scrap metal. He looked at her, his gaze unusually gentle. You see him. You actually see him, not just his chair or what he can't do. That's rare. Raven shrugged, brushing her hands on her oil-streaked overalls. Maybe because I know what it's like to be invisible. Julian tilted his head. What do you mean? She hesitated, then nodded toward the rusted beams overhead. You don't end up living under a bridge by accident. He didn't press further. Instead, he sat with her in that silence, respectful and quiet, the way someone might sit next to a grave they didn't know the story behind. Later, as dusk approached, Eli brought out a drawing. It was crayon and wild imagination, but clear enough. A girl with wild hair, welding goggles, and arms made of gold wires. Above her head, in bold orange letters, he had written, "The girl who fixes everything." Raven's breath caught. She took the paper slowly, fingers trembling just slightly. He means it, Julian said softly. You've changed something in him. In both of us. She didn't respond. Instead, she pinned the drawing up next to her workbench, right where she could see it every time she looked up. Later that week, Julian made another visit, this time more tentative. There's something I want to ask, he said, standing beside a humming circuit board she was tuning. Hit me. He exhaled. Eli's therapists. They're good, but clinical. He needs someone real. Someone who helps him believe he can do more than just cope. He talks about you every day. I'd like you to keep working with him. Not just here, but at my place too. Maybe even help us build some tech for other kids like him. Raven set her tools down slowly. I'm not a role model. No, Julian agreed. You're better. You're human. He needs that. She folded her arms, weighing the words, the invitation. Her life had been a solo act for so long, raw and unpredictable. She didn't know what it meant to stay in someone else's world. But maybe Eli's world was one worth staying in. Let's try, she said. Just a little at a time. Julian smiled. That's all I'm asking. And in that moment, beneath the city's belly, surrounded by spare parts and the sound of invention, something unspoken passed between them. Trust, tentative but real, growing slowly like vines through cracked concrete. The gears had begun to turn. The workshop was quiet that evening. Raven sat alone beneath the overpass, absently turning a gear between her fingers. The clink of metal echoed softly as dusk painted the city in hues of blue and rust. In the days since she'd started helping Eli more regularly, visiting Julian's place twice a week, building little inventions in the quiet corners of his sleek apartment, her world had started to feel different. Fuller. Warmer. She still kept her guard up, of course. The world wasn't kind to girls like her, ones with criminal records, who grew up in foster homes, who learned to survive on instinct and engine grease. But something about Eli's laughter and Julian's steady presence had begun to chip away at the walls she'd built. Tonight, though, the warmth was missing. A wind had shifted in the air, and Raven could feel it deep in her bones, the way animals sense storms long before the clouds gather. It came the next morning. She had just finished organizing a shelf of salvaged drone parts when she heard heels clicking against the gravel. That sound alone made her tense. Heels didn't belong in Eastmore's industrial zone. And they certainly didn't echo with confidence unless the wearer had power or didn't care about danger. When Raven turned toward the sound, a woman was already standing at the edge of her workshop. Tall. Immaculate. Hair in sculpted waves. Red lipstick sharp as a blade. Raven, I presume, the woman said, eyes scanning the garage with visible distaste. And you are? Raven replied, keeping her tone flat. The woman smiled like a wolf. Lena Vollen. Eli's biological mother. Raven's hand clenched the nearest tool. Julian had told her bits and pieces. Lena had left years ago, unable to handle the responsibility of a disabled child or the domestic life that came with it. She'd vanished from the narrative, not even showing up for court when Julian sought full custody. And now, here she was, standing like she owned the ground. You've been busy, Lena continued, stepping inside uninvited. Little garage sessions. Dinners. Weekend projects. Very wholesome. What do you want? Raven asked. To give you some advice, Lena said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. You've had your fun, playing teacher mechanic mom, But let's not pretend this is your life. Raven raised an eyebrow. Funny. Seems to be. Oh please, Lena scoffed. You think Julian's going to seriously consider building a life with a woman who sleeps under a bridge and has a record? I know who you are, Raven. Petty theft. Breaking and entering. Not exactly parent of the year material. I was 19, Raven said, voice low. Hungry. Alone. Lena shrugged. Doesn't matter. Try explaining that to a court when you're standing next to a billionaire. Trust me, they'll see it my way. You walked out on him. I evolved, Lena snapped. And now I'm back. The narrative is shifting. The media's sniffing around, and guess who they'll believe? The polished former wife or the ex-con who lives in scrap metal. Raven didn't speak. She didn't trust herself to. Lena smirked, satisfied with the silence. Enjoy the spotlight while you can, darling, she said as she turned on her heel. But understand this, if you don't walk away now, I will take everything. As her heels faded into the distance, Raven exhaled slowly, the tension in her chest coiling like wire wound too tight. That evening, Julian arrived at the workshop, Eli asleep in the back seat of his car. Raven met him outside, arms crossed. She came, Raven said before he could speak. Julian's expression darkened. Lena? She threatened court. Custody. Said I was bad press. Julian's jaw clenched. She's bluffing. She has money. Image. Lawyers. I have a record. Julian stepped forward. You think I care about that? I think you should, Raven said. Because they will. The moment she starts throwing my past around, you'll lose investors. Reputation. Maybe even custody. And Eli, he'll be the one in the crossfire. He shook his head. No. I won't let her weaponize your past. I already let her, Raven said quietly. The moment I stepped into your life. Julian was silent. Raven walked to a shelf and grabbed a small box. Inside were blueprints, tiny toys, and a plastic figurine Eli had built out of nuts and bolts. She handed it to Julian. Give this to him. Tell him I said goodbye. He stared at the box, then at her. You can't mean this. I do, she said, though her voice cracked. If I stay, she wins. And Eli loses. I won't let him be torn apart. Julian reached for her, but she stepped back. Don't. Please. With a final look, a mixture of heartbreak and something close to understanding, he nodded, turned, and walked away. The moment he left, Raven locked the garage, slumped to the floor, and pressed her forehead to her knees. That night, she slept with the crumpled drawing Eli had given her, the girl who fixes everything, tucked under her pillow. But she didn't feel like she'd fixed anything. She felt like she'd broken everything. 3 days passed. Rain returned, sharp and relentless. The city hummed with the noise of engines, storms, and distant sirens. Then, at midnight on the 4th day, a pounding shook Raven's door. Raven. Julian's voice. Desperate. Breathless. She opened the door to find him drenched, eyes wild. It's Eli, he said. He's not eating. Not speaking. He hasn't smiled since you left. He's fading, Raven. She froze. He left this under his pillow, Julian continued, holding up a piece of paper. On it, written in shaky handwriting. If Miss Raven doesn't come back, I don't want anything anymore. Her hand flew to her mouth, a sob catching in her throat. I thought I was protecting him, she whispered. You are what protects him, Julian said, stepping closer. He doesn't care about courtrooms or scandals. He cares about you. We both do. The rain poured harder. Raven didn't care. She stepped forward, fell into his arms, and wept into his shoulder. I'm coming home, she whispered. And just like that, the storm began to break. The city didn't pause for heartfelt reunions. By the time Raven returned to Julian's penthouse, her boots soaked, her heart trembling, and Eli wrapped tightly in her arms, trouble was already waiting outside the gates. Cameras. Reporters. Headlines. Somehow, word had spread. A blurry photo of Raven stepping out of Julian's car, Eli nestled against her chest, had gone viral. The narrative wrote itself, billionaire CEO's secret romance with ex-con under a bridge. Overnight, Raven went from unknown tinkerer to tabloid fodder. The press didn't care about her kindness. They cared about her record. That morning, Raven stood in Julian's kitchen in an oversized hoodie, clutching a mug of tea as headlines scrolled across the screen. CEO's love interest has criminal past, dangerous influence? From scrap metal to sky towers, who is Raven Holt? Former thief now lives with tech tycoon and his disabled son. She read them all. And then she read the comments. She's using them. Gold digger. Wait and watch. This is why men lose their empires. He'll regret this. Mark my words. Is she even safe to be around that kid? Each one was a stab to the gut. Julian found her sitting on the balcony, the screen of her phone still glowing. He said nothing, just sat beside her and offered a gentle hand on her shoulder. I knew it would happen, she whispered. People like me. We're not allowed to win. You didn't do anything wrong. I existed, she said. That's enough for them. Julian exhaled. We'll weather it. We'll prove them wrong. But the storm was only beginning. 2 days later, Lena returned, but this time, there were no heels, no fake smiles. She came armed with lawyers. Julian's legal team met them at the gate, but it didn't stop the headlines from multiplying. Lena filed a formal motion to reopen the custody case, citing concerns over Eli's well-being and dangerous associations. The real target, of course, was Raven. You should have stayed away, Lena spat when she cornered Raven behind the garage of the Fix-It Center that week. I came back for him, Raven said calmly. You came back for yourself, Lena hissed. And now you've dragged him into your mess. You're poison, and I'm going to prove it. Raven stood tall. You walked out on him. He remembers. He's 5, Lena snapped. He remembers nothing. What he wants doesn't matter. A voice interrupted behind them. I think it does. Both women turned. Eli sat in his upgraded wheelchair, Julian beside him. The boy's face was pale but resolute. I don't want to live with you, he said firmly. You're not nice to Daddy. Or to Miss Raven. You don't make us feel like home. Lena's expression cracked, for just a moment, before twisting back into fury. You think this is over? Julian stepped forward. It is. You left him. You signed the papers. If you push this, Lena, I'll fight, and you'll lose again. But the damage was done. Even though Lena backed off temporarily, the media didn't. The custody threat fueled another wave of stories. The Fix-It Center was swarmed with questions. Donations stalled. Parents became hesitant. And Raven? Raven packed her things. Julian found her in the living room, a duffel bag at her feet. You're not doing this again. I have to, she said, eyes glassy. I can take being called names. Judged for who I was. But I won't let them hurt Eli to get to me. Julian dropped to his knees, taking her hands. Do you love him? Tears spilled down her cheeks. More than anything. And me? The words had never been spoken. Not once. Until now. Yes, she whispered. I love you. Then let me protect you, he said. Let me protect us. The next morning, the world shifted. Julian Carter appeared on national television. No PR team. No filters. Just him. In a navy suit. Face steady. Voice calm. The interviewer, clearly looking for scandal, wasted no time. Mr. Carter, the public wants to know, why her? Why risk your son's safety, your company's future, on a woman like Raven Holt? Julian leaned forward. Because she saved my son. He let the words settle before continuing. She found him on the street. Fixed his wheelchair. Made him laugh. Gave him courage. When he got sick, she was the only one he called for. She is the reason he's happy, healthy, and healing. The interviewer pressed on. But her criminal record. She was a kid, Julian said. Alone. She survived the only way she could. And instead of letting that world consume her, she built something beautiful from the rubble. If you want a headline, here it is, I love her. And I will spend every day proving she deserves all the good this world has to offer. Silence filled the studio. And then, the internet answered. Thousands of comments. Support. Donations to the Fix-It Center surged. Parents of kids with disabilities spoke out in Raven's defense. Her former foster siblings found her online, sharing stories of the girl who used to fix broken toys and defend younger kids. Even Lena, watching the tidal wave of support, quietly dropped her case. That night, Raven sat on the rooftop of Julian's building, Eli asleep beside her, a blanket wrapped around them both. The city lights blinked far below. Julian joined them with 2 mugs of hot cocoa. You're staying, right? He asked. She looked at him, eyes soft. I'm not going anywhere. And for the first time in her life, Raven believed it. She had fought. She had stayed. And the world had finally started listening. Spring arrived in Eastmore like a shy visitor, quietly brushing away the soot of winter and leaving behind pale blossoms on the trees that lined the streets. Beneath the overpass where Raven's workshop once stood solitary and overlooked, the world had transformed. What was once a patchwork shelter of metal and tarps had become the Fix-It Forward Center, A renovated industrial space wrapped in mural-painted walls, sunlight spilling through tall windows, and laughter echoing from every corner. It had only been a year, yet Raven Holt's life was unrecognizable. She no longer walked alone under the weight of her past. She walked alongside Julian and Eli, sometimes hand in hand, other times with oil on her face and tools in her back pocket, but always with purpose. Always with love. The wedding was small and held right behind the center. No grand ballroom. No chandeliers. Just family, built, not born, and friends from the community who had seen the pieces of Raven's life come together like one of her machines. Julian wore a rolled-sleeve shirt and a vest. Raven wore a borrowed lace dress with grease still faintly under her nails. Eli, now walking with the help of a sleek silver walker they'd modified together, proudly carried the rings in a small metal box he'd crafted himself. "I hope you don't drop them, Dad," he whispered with a smirk as he handed the box to Julian. Raven's eyes sparkled as she whispered her vows. "I never thought I'd be part of something whole. But you and Eli. You rebuilt me." Julian's voice trembled. "I spent my life building things that looked perfect on the outside. But it wasn't until I found you that I knew what it meant to feel complete." They kissed under an arch made of old bike wheels and wildflowers, the very first thing Eli had asked to help build when the center opened. And when the applause faded and the music rose, Raven looked around at the family she'd forged, not just Julian and Eli, but the children playing in the garden, the volunteers fixing scooters and toy drones, and the once cautious parents now laughing freely in a space that felt like home. The Fix-It Forward Center had become more than a garage. It was a revolution wrapped in warmth. A place where broken things weren't discarded, they were transformed. Kids in wheelchairs, with prosthetics, or simply different abilities came to build, create, and discover. Raven taught them how to rewire RC cars into painting bots, how to turn broken electronics into working radios, and how to see beauty in the scraps. Eli, now 6, was the heart of the center. Every child who arrived for the first time was greeted with a smile and a tour, usually ending with, "This is Miss Raven. She can fix anything. Even bad days." Julian handled operations, grants, and logistics, still running Skynova Technologies, but now with his office windows filled with drawings, toy inventions, and crayon signed letters that read things like, "Thank you for helping my kid dream again." At home, their rhythm was simple, joyful. Raven cooked messy breakfasts, Eli insisted on helping even when it meant flour on the ceiling, and Julian, ever the meticulous planner, learned to live with chaos in exchange for laughter. Their modest apartment above the Fix-It Center became a haven. The smell of sawdust and cinnamon lingered in the air. Tools lived beside toys. And every evening, the three of them curled on their old couch, a hand-me-down Raven had once patched with duct tape, watching old sci-fi shows or building forts from cardboard boxes. But even in the calm, reminders of the journey they'd traveled remained. Some nights, Raven still woke in a cold sweat, heart racing, hearing echoes of her past, doors slamming, judges speaking, Lena's sneer. When it happened, Julian would pull her close, whispering, "You're safe now. You're home." And when Eli woke from bad dreams, Raven would lie beside him, letting him fiddle with a gear or bolt until his breathing calmed. They healed together. They grew together. And they celebrated everything, each child who learned to weld a toy, every new idea Eli sketched on the walls of the workshop, and even the tiny silver pin Julian surprised Raven with on her birthday. It was shaped like a wrench, engraved with just 2 words, "Still building." On the 1-year anniversary of the Fix-It Forward Center, they hosted an open day. Hundreds came, families, local officials, news crews, and even skeptics. The air buzzed with the sounds of laughter, the whir of tools, and kids proudly showing off their inventions. Eli stood at the microphone, fidgeting nervously before reading from his note cards. "My name is Eli Wade Holt," he said. "And this place helped me find my strength. Miss Raven, my mom, taught me that being different is just another way of being awesome. She helped me walk again, but more than that, she helped me believe I could build something, even when the world said I couldn't." Raven couldn't stop the tears. Julian squeezed her hand as the crowd erupted in applause. Later, as the sun dipped below the skyline, Raven sat on the roof of the center beside Julian. Eli was inside with his friends, showing off a new robotic glove he'd designed with Raven's help. "You remember what I said that night under the rain?" Julian asked quietly. "You said I saved you," she replied. "You did," he said. "And you keep doing it. Every single day." Raven leaned her head on his shoulder. "Funny. I thought I was the one being rescued." Below them, lights flickered on in the center. Kids ran through the garden paths, laughter echoing up toward the stars. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if that old wheelchair hadn't broken?" she asked. Julian smiled. "All the time." Raven traced her fingers along the ridges of a gear pendant Eli had given her earlier that day. On the back, in tiny letters, it read, "Even broken things can build beautiful things." She looked out over the city and felt it, something she'd never dared to believe in before. Belonging. Not because she'd fixed her past, or erased her mistakes, but because she'd turned them into something that could lift others. And in doing so, she'd finally found what every broken soul secretly craves, not perfection, not escape, but home. As the stars blinked above and laughter rang out below, Raven Holt, the girl who once lived under a bridge with nothing but tools and tenacity, smiled into the night. She hadn't just built a better life. She'd built a forever.